The Harlem Hellfighters was a regiment of New York National Guardsmen in the First World War. They were set up to fail by their own government. They were humiliated, degraded, eventually given to the French army as a throwaway, and they ended up coming home as one of the most decorated units in the entire U.S. Army.
The Harlem Hellfighters are one of the most important regiments in American history. In World War I, they helped to establish to the entire world the power of black soldiers in the military.
It was very difficult at that time for African Americans to get into the United States military because there was this perception that African Americans would not do well in battle. They had to overcome the prejudice of their own countrymen and yet also perform ably on the battlefield.
Like so many units of African American descent, when they go overseas, they're not sure what they're going to do. Are they going to fight as infantry? Or are they going to be stevedores and load ships? Or are they going to be labor units and cut wood?
And so they're committed to labor duty, they're unloading ships, building latrines, those type of support services. And as you can imagine, these men have been trained and they're willing to fight, they're ready to fight, and this is stressful for them.
They were finally given to the French army, which in a way was an even greater insult because in the First World War, when the United States entered, General Pershing, the commanding officer, was very clear that American forces would not be fed piecemeal into the French and British army because the French and British wanted reinforcements, and Pershing said absolutely not. When Americans join this war, they will fight as an American force under an American flag led by an American general. ... except for the black guys. You can have them.
Henry Johnson is perhaps one of the most remarkable black military heroes in U.S. history.
And he found himself in no man's land with Private Needham Roberts manning a listening post.
And Needham Roberts hears click, click, click. He realizes somebody's cutting the wire. It's potentially a German raid.
And so Roberts is passing him grenades, and they line up these grenades, and the Germans actually do come across the lines. Roberts is hurt, and now Henry Johnson is left to defend their position and to stave off this attack. And then he makes the mistake of jamming a French cartridge into his American gun, and it no longer will work. And the Germans are on top of it.
He then used his rifle like a club, and then he ended up fighting with a knife against the Kaiser's best and turned them.
He's wounded in the fray. He's struck, for example, in the foot, and has a debilitating injury as a result. And he fights them off, he says, for what seemed like an hour.
The Germans ran shrieking into the night, all because of one man.
It's not until the next morning that people realize what a tremendous act this was. They discover 4 bodies of dead German soldiers. And they also realize from the equipment and other things that are left behind that as many as 30 may have been involved in this altercation.
As soon as he drove off those Germans, the French awarded him with the Croix de Guerre, a great honor. Unfortunately, it took about 75 years for the U.S. government to give him the Legion of Merit. Had he been white, he would have walked out of that war with the Medal of Honor. What was so shocking to me when I began to research the story of the Hellfighters was that after they had performed so magnificently in combat, the United States government actually sent a memorandum to the French government, essentially implementing Jim Crow, essentially saying, don't give them some notion that they are equals because we don't want them taking that notion back to the United States and demanding equality.
When he come back to the United States, he's not awarded the Purple Heart. There's no notation in his military record of his injury. And so he winds up not being able to work because of this injury. He doesn't get any kind of assistance from the army or from the government as a result. And he ends up dying in 1929 penniless. So it again shows the paradox. Here's this great story of valor and of courage on the part of this soldier. And ultimately, he comes back to a nation that doesn't honor that sacrifice.
We tend to think we all know American history so well, but the story of the Harlem Hellfighters should be one of the first stories told. It wasn't about killing other people, it was about being Americans and serving their country well. That was the inclination of the Harlem Hellfighters.
When you are African American in 1917, democracy is armor. Democracy is a weapon. And to fight for a war to make the world safe for democracy was something more than just some ethereal crusade for the Hellfighters. It had concrete results. They were fighting for the rights to be a citizen of the country that they were born in.
I would say this, that I do know that during that same war, that America was, as is today, so racist until the German officers, when they were captured, could eat in the same mess hall and have the same accommodations as the white American officers. But the black troops were segregated, couldn't come into that mess hall unless they were scrubbing the floors and washing dishes. So it was a white man honoring another white man, though one was American and one was German, and they were supposed to be enemies. There was still a tie that was able to bind the two together. Beautiful.
I can't believe exactly what I'm hearing. We went to war in World War II to fight for the freedom of speech. We didn't fight for freedom of speech of hatred. Many of our members, I'm the National Commander of Jewish War Veterans, and over 50,000 of our men died fighting for your right to free speech here now. I don't understand how you come out with such hatred.
Phil, excuse me, Phil.
Yes. Mr. Muhammad. Sir.
You make me sick to my stomach with that. Because at the same time that you were fighting, you were not fighting for the freedom and independence of black people. Soldiers, black soldiers in segregated companies lost their lives on foreign soil there, but would have to come back and fight just to get a bite to eat and not have to go to the toilet on the side of the road somewhere in the bushes. So you're nothing but hypocrites, and you won't pull that small-time stuff over on me.
I just wanted to share something with you. Sean King, who writes for the New York Daily News and who I follow on Twitter, and if you don't follow Sean King on Twitter, do so. Sean King is brilliant. And he writes regularly for the New York Daily News. And he wrote this piece called Why I'll Never Stand Again for the Star Spangled Banner. And I just want to share 3 paragraphs from Sean's piece about this. He says, first off, he's talking about the Star Spangled Banner. He says, first off, the song, which was originally written as a poem, didn't become our national anthem until 1931, which was 117 years after Francis Scott Key wrote it. Most of us have no true idea what in the hell we've been hearing or singing all these years. But as it turns out, Key's full poem actually has a 3rd stanza, which few of us have ever heard. In it, he openly celebrates the murder of slaves. Yes, really. It goes like this. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And then Sean King goes on to explain what that means. He says, well, it's always been known that the song was written during American slavery, and that when those words about this nation being the land of the free didn't apply to the millions who had been held in bondage, few of us had any idea that the song itself was rooted in the celebration of slavery and the murder of Africans in America who were being hired by the British military to give them strength, not only in the War of 1812, but in the Battle of Fort McHenry in 1814. These black men were called the Corps of Colonial Marines, and they served valiantly for the British military, and Francis Scott Key despised them. He was glad to see them experience terror and death in war, to the point that he wrote a poem about it, and that poem is now our national anthem. While I fundamentally reject the notion that anyone who owned other human beings was either good, moral, or decent, Francis Scott Key left absolutely no doubt that he was a stone-cold bigot. He came from generations of plantation-owning bigots. See, I don't call them plantations anymore. I call them concentration camps. But anyhow, they got wealthy off of it. Key, as District Attorney of Washington, fought for slavery and against abolitionists every chance he got. Even when Africans in D.C. were injured or murdered, Francis Scott Key stood strong against justice for them. He openly spoke racist words against Africans in America. He said that they were, quote, a distinct and inferior race of people which all experience proves to be the greatest evil that afflicts a community, end quote. This is in the context of Colin Kaepernick's refusal to stand for the Star Spangled Banner. Sean King nails it, as Sean King so often does. And it's just a brilliant piece. Check it out. The British, yeah, well, I don't have time to go into the whole backstory. But anyhow, we'll be back right after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The article, by the way, is in the New York Daily News. It's titled King, Why I'll Never Stand Again for the Star Spangled Banner by Sean King, S-H-A-U-N-K-I-N-G.